Al-Qaeda than they are on the side of Afghanistan and the United States. So this is complicated. And I think you've got to go in and do everything, but you can't just do one thing. You've got to have a comprehensive approach. So I'm hoping that our government, working with the government of Afghanistan, will come up with a way of getting rid of the poppy crop, but giving an alternative way of making a living and helping to support those farmers. And one of the things that I suggested, and try to do a little work to help on, is that Afghanistan was known as the orchard of Asia. It had massive orchards of all kinds of fruits. It grows some of the greatest pomegranates, for example, in the world. And pomegranate juice is now being touted as something that people with high blood pressure and heart disease should drink. So it has proven medicinal values, but all kinds of fruits. And during their long war with the Soviet Union decimated the countryside and orchards were destroyed. And I said, well, one thing we could do is start replanting those orchards. We're good at that. We know how to do that. So show people that we're not just going to leave them with nothing. We're going to come and help them with agricultural aid and give them some alternatives. So I think the opportunity is still there to try to deal with this serious problem that you've put your finger on that has all kinds of consequences in our war against terrorism. But we got to be smart and consistent and stay with it. Don't just come up with one idea and then not follow through. We've got to stay with it. This is hard work and we can do it, but we have to go at it year after year. Yes? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator, for coming back to New Hampshire. How do we stop the outsourcing of jobs, of high-tech jobs? It seems like every company that I call, I end up speaking to somebody in a foreign country. Dell, Apple, Autodesk, you name it, I don't care. And my son works in IT, so I won't mention his company, he'll get fired. But how do we stop that?
Well, first we have to stop giving any tax breaks to companies that outsource jobs. We are still doing it. In fact, they've been given kind of a free rein under the Bush administration. The gentleman who chaired President Bush's Council of Economic Advisors got in trouble for saying what the Bush administration thinks, which is outsourcing is a plus for the United States economy. Well, try telling that to the thousands of people, the millions of people whose jobs have been exported and outsourced. So we've got to get our tax code to start rewarding Americans who create jobs. And I think we can do that because this has now reached kind of a critical mass where people understand that it's not just losing some jobs. For a while during the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, a lot of jobs that were being lost, people argued, and I think had some basis for arguing, well, it would have been hard to keep those jobs because, those were jobs that were kind of low-tech jobs. They were jobs that could be done so much cheaper somewhere else. Now we are losing high-tech jobs. We are losing professional jobs. I was in a small hospital in New York about 2 years ago, and they proudly showed me this new machine that they now use to have x-rays read in India. They fired 2 of their radiologists, and they hired 4 in India at about half the cost that it took to have 2. So anybody who thinks that outsourcing only happens to somebody else, unless we get serious about this, any job is at risk. And I think it's important America stand up and stop it.
I'm a mom of 4, and I have a daughter who's recently diagnosed with Asperger's. And before she was diagnosed, we had a terrible time trying to find someone who could give her a good evaluation, and by the time we get the appointment, our insurance would change, and so then we couldn't afford it. And I was just wondering, as president, what do you think we could do about something like that?
Well, thank you for asking that question. And I really wish you and your daughter and your family well. Now that she's been diagnosed, there's a lot of things that can be provided in terms of service and support. Not enough, but I know that a very vigilant mom like you will find everything that you can. The questions about Asperger's, which is part of the autism spectrum, and I'm sure everybody's heard of autism by now, haven't you? Autism is a condition that we don't yet know a lot about, but it is becoming much more common. It used to be pretty rare. I can remember when I was growing up, maybe I met one person who had autism. As an adult, I had one friend whose son was autistic. I did a lot of work on child development, and I even took an extra year at the Yale Child Study Center because I wanted so much to understand how children develop, because I think that's important in figuring out how to help support families and deal with their problems. And back in those days, there was this really pernicious and horrible theory that somehow mothers were responsible for their kids having autism. I never believed that, and of course science has certainly debunked it completely. But the fact is we are seeing more and more children diagnosed with something along the autism spectrum, and it's now up to about 1 in 200. And it's more common among boys, but it happens with girls as well. So I have been working on this for a number of years, and there's 2 things we're trying to do. Last year we passed the Combating Autism Act, which is aimed at putting a lot more money into research. Most diseases and conditions are caused by one or more than one of the combinations of genetics, we're born with susceptibility, of environment, we're exposed to something that might trigger the susceptibility, and lifestyle behaviors. With children who are diagnosed with autism, we think it's some combination of genetic susceptibility and maybe something environmental, but nobody knows. So we're putting a lot more money into research. But that's not enough, because as she said, the problem is still a lot of doctors don't recognize the symptoms. And insurance companies hate to pay for it, so they try to avoid giving you any support. I have a bill now that I hope will be passed before the end of this Congress, which increases the services that are available and helps more doctors get trained in recognizing the symptoms. Because the longer you take to diagnose someone, the longer you may have to work to try to get that young person to have the ability to respond. And Asperger's is a more mild version, but it still interferes with attention span, emotional connection, some of the things that we see along this spectrum. So I'm going to do everything I can. I mean, autism is one of those conditions that now is so important, but it hasn't yet really broken through in public consciousness. If more people understood how many of our kids are being diagnosed, how many of our kids are at risk, there would be a great outcry around the country. And I'm going to try to be a president who puts autism on the map. And we're going to do something to help find the cause of it and help families like yours get the help you need.